Hit us up on all social media at The Buffalo Pod.
Welcome back to the Centered on Buffalo podcast. Today we have a special collaboration podcast with the Shout podcast, one of my favorite podcasts to listen to weekly during the season, during the offseason. Ryan Talbert and Matt Parrino do a great job. Today we have Matt on the show here with me. Matt covers the Bills for Syracuse.com. He hosts the Shout podcast, as I mentioned. He was formerly with the UFC, covering that sport for 4 years. One of my favorite people to spend time with. Matt, welcome back on the podcast, brother.
Good to see you, man. And we got to chop it up last week. I'm sure we'll talk about some chicken wings. It's great to be on the podcast and talk about the Bills. I mean, I've told fans for the last couple of weeks as they've been kind of pelting me with questions around town, online. This is like the most exciting Bills offseason that I've experienced probably since Josh Allen's rookie season, because the Diggs year when they got him was pretty big, but there's so much unknown going into this year. I feel like a kid in a candy store again. It's a lot of fun.
It is. And that's actually where I wanted to get to first, because from the outside looking in, and even as I was watching ESPN this morning, eating some breakfast after a workout, one of the topics is, have the Bills surrounded Josh Allen with enough talent again? All the departures. Is this a rebuilding year? And if you look at, the Vegas insider sites, the, spreads, the lines on what the Bills over under on wins will be, their Super Bowl chances, the betting folks don't seem to think this is a rebuilding year. I don't either. But what are your thoughts? Do you feel like with all the veterans they've moved on from within the organization and the people that they brought into this team, especially on the offensive side of the football, but overall, do you feel like this is a rebuilding year for the Bills?
Not at all. And there's a lot of things that go into this. And it's such an interesting conversation. I don't think we'll really have an answer until September. But if you look on the defensive side of the ball, that's where most of the players that have been such a part of this thing have moved on. The Bills have moved off of those players. Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, Tre'Davious White. I mean, that's your entire secondary, right? From the outside looking in, you're really starting to question, like, all right, who are these guys trying to get up on Christian Benford? What Rasul Douglas meant to this team last year? The question marks at safety. Leonard Floyd had such an impact last year as a pass rusher. How are they going to replace that? And those are all like real questions, and they need to be answered. But you look at back to 2017, your last year with the team. What has this team always found a way to do? And that is build a defense. Guys that you didn't have on your radar. Like last offseason, we spent most of the time talking about replacing Tremaine Edmonds and how was Terrell Bernard going to fit into this defense? Was he even going to be the guy? He goes out and turns into, what looks like a burgeoning superstar at the position. Sean McDermott knows the secondary. He's going to find, I think they already have cornerbacks. I think if Trey White was still on the roster, he'd have a hard time beating out these two guys that played at such a high level in Benford and Douglas. You have a young guy in Kaiir Elam that I think they're still developing. There's questions at safety, but they've gone out and brought in guys that they think are the next iteration of what they built with Poyer and Hyde. And, they took a couple stabs at it. They drafted Cole Bishop. They brought in Mike Edwards. They brought back Taylor Rapp, who was already in their scheme. So I'm not worried about defense. I think most of the outside questions also come from the offense. Stephon Diggs, Mitch Morse, two huge pieces that they have to replace. But who was Stephon Diggs at the end of last season? The last 12 games, they weren't good. The last 2 seasons, right? I mean, especially in the playoffs. You go back and look at his playoff numbers, and they are not worth what they were going to be paying him this year. They had to reimagine things. And so you look at what they invested in a first-round weapon last year in Dalton Kincaid. They got him a supporting cast member in Keon Coleman, at least at the start. We'll see what that looks like as this thing goes along. A veteran in Curtis Samuel. Are they like household names? Not at all. But household names aren't household names until they do something to become that. So I think they're really high on Kincaid, what he's going to mean for this offense. And oh, by the way, they still have Josh Allen.
They have Josh Allen. James Cook had a Pro Bowl season last year, and he was voted into the Pro Bowl. This wasn't like there was 8 running backs that opted out of the Pro Bowl and he got in. He had a great season last year. He's dynamic out of the backfield as a receiver as well. And so to me, we've seen this kind of go both ways in the NFL right now. You have teams like Philadelphia and Miami who are willing to spend north of 20% of their salary cap on the wide receiver position, and really just two guys for both teams take up over 20% of their salary cap. And then you have teams similar to the Chiefs and now what the Bills are doing at the receiver position. And there's others like this in the league that have been successful where you're saying, look, we can draft young guys that will come in and they can make an impact. These young receivers are making an impact earlier in their careers. They're super cheap at that point as well. And then we can have some role players. And look, maybe, it's unfair to compare Dalton Kincaid to Travis Kelce, who may be or probably likely is the best receiving tight end in the history of the game. But we've seen Kansas City win Super Bowls with him being their number one threat at receiver, and then guys with different skill sets. And that's what I've liked about the way they've built this receiving core is the different skill sets. You have size in some instances, you have speed, you have guys like Khalil Shakir who are craftier, and he's kind of deceptively fast. You saw him break away against the Jets for a long touchdown. He broke the one against the Steelers, but he's kind of shiftier in the middle of that field. I like the skill set. I think Dawson Knox, coming off of a season last year where he got the injured wrist and he tried to play through it, and then he came back and he did have that catch for a touchdown in the playoffs, which a surefire bet moving forward is Dawson Knox in the first round of the playoffs catches the first touchdown pass. I feel like that's happened maybe 3 years, definitely 2 years here for the Bills. But I've liked how they've built this. I have not had boots on the ground in an OTA practice, but I've loved what I've heard from Chase Claypool. I've loved what Sean McDermott said about him, and whether he's just trying to build up a guy who's maybe lost some confidence, or he simply means his comments when he says his character's high, his work ethic's high. He's trying to bounce back, trying to get back to kind of what he was early in his career. What have you seen from Chase Claypool out at OTAs?
I've been really impressed. And when they made the signing, I was on the side of the fence that was take a shot on a guy like this, a guy that they did their due diligence on back at the draft when the Pittsburgh Steelers took him in, I believe it was 2020. Um, when those kind of guys become available, no matter how things panned out for them, if they've had some success in the NFL, I think it's worth a look inside your building. So I was pro the move. Since I've talked to him, since I've seen his kind of imprint in the building, I'm all in on the signing. I think he's going to be a guy that's going to be on this roster. I think he's going to have a role. What that role ends up being, we'll find out. But he can block. He can play all four phases of special teams. He's a deep threat. Go back and watch some of his highlights, as I'm sure you remember. When he was with Ben Roethlisberger in that last year before the last year, when Ben still had a little bit of something left, I mean, they were cooking up down the field in some of just the most unbelievable kind of plays because of the size that Claypool has. Like, you don't think that he's going to get on you and run past you the way that he does. And I think he's almost like the perfect replacement for a Gabe Davis. Not that he's going to have that kind of volume in this offense. I don't think a lot of guys that you have high expectations for are going to have the volume that Diggs and Davis did last year because they want to move things around. They want to be unpredictable a little bit. Everyone eats is the phrase that's been kind of bantied about at OTAs. But I think Claypool has a skill set that they're going to lean into. And Sean McDermott, you know this better than anybody, Eric. He loves tapping into chips on shoulders. And there's not a bigger one in the NFL right now, or there shouldn't be, than Claypool, who was 3 years removed from being on a podcast. I think it was The Pivot, where he was talking about being a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL. Right. And it's just fallen off of a cliff to get back any semblance of what his career was. I think he knows this opportunity is massive.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor, Danos Seasoning. And it's never been an easier or better time to yum yum get you some. For a limited time, they're doing a buy one, get one free sale at Walmart. If you buy 2 bottles of Danos Seasoning, then you upload your receipt to the link that will be in the show notes. And from that link, you will get Venmo'd back the price of your second bottle. Go out and get you some today. I think so too, and I've loved his approach. I love how hungry he is, and I've loved that he said, look, I was a beast on special teams at Notre Dame after my rookie year, and I had that production. I kind of got away from it, and he was excited last year in Miami to get back to playing special teams, whether he has that role in Buffalo or not. Guys that are willing to play special teams and even talk openly about it, like, you wouldn't say that in the media if you really didn't want them to shove you on special teams here in the preseason and early in the regular season. And those types of guys are rare because it's a violent I mean, there's a reason that they're trying to take the kickoff out of it, that they're constantly maneuvering these special teams plays, because those are the most violent plays generally throughout an NFL game. And for a guy like him who had that success early in his career and sitting here at year 5 now, for him to still be hungry to play special teams and say, look, I was a beast on special teams. That's one of the things that was so appealing with me coming into the league and what I could do for the Steelers. Okay, I'm willing to go back to that. That says a lot to me, and hopefully it means something. But you mentioned the defensive side of the ball. You mentioned pass rusher, what they're maybe missing in Leonard Floyd. The Bills just got an extra $10 million in cap space, which didn't kick in until June 1st with the Tre'Davious White release. So that was a post June 1st. They get $10 million off the books that they can now spend. And I think that Bean throughout the summer will be active, similar to last summer when he signed Poona Ford and Leonard Floyd both over the summertime. When you look at who the Bills could potentially bring in with that extra little bit of cap room, what's hitting your eye here?
So the one big issue that, like, for a Leonard Floyd cut deal like in June, I don't see a lot of really enticing options on the free agent market for positions of need. So, like, I think right now they're pretty set on the offensive side of the ball. I'm looking at edge rusher specifically, maybe defensive tackle, but then in the secondary, I think cornerback is still a position that, after those top 3 that I mentioned earlier, you go to a guy like Jamarcus Ingram, who's right now your number 4. There's not a lot of vets in that room. You have a lot of young players, and there's a lot out there still to be had. I mean, you look at the Xavier Howards of the world. I know that a lot of websites have talked about James Bradbury in Philadelphia. He's still on their roster, but he's coming off of a bad year. They can add some cap space if they move on from him. Brandon Beane drafted him, was part of the team that drafted him in Carolina all those years ago. So that's a name that makes sense. But I also don't think that this money is going to be burning a hole in their pocket. Listen, $10 million in cap space is great, right? You need about 3 or 4 of that to take care of your draft class. So then you need about 2 or 3 of that for the practice squad, because now it's 16 players. So there's not as much money right now as I think that fans are. You see that $10 million mark and you're like, go make a trade, go get Marcus Lattimore, go get, whoever. One guy that I'll throw a name out there that I think is really interesting, and I don't think that it's going to happen anytime soon. I think it might even go into the season, maybe looking at a trade deadline deal. Matthew Judon at 32 years old with the Patriots. If they come out and they're really bad and they're like, Drake May either isn't ready to hit the field and they're rolling with Jacoby Brissett, or he does play and it hasn't been pretty. They got a lot of young pass rushers there. Josh Uche's there. Maybe they want to deal Judon for maybe a day 3 pick, get something back, get him off the books. The Bills wouldn't have to pay the total tab there. And I think that's a guy that you can add if you get through the first couple weeks of your season and you're like, man, we need somebody on the outside. That's a name that I think could be really interesting. I just don't think it's going to be available until then, because they probably want to get through training camp. And listen, maybe Drake May hits the ground running and he's what they think he's going to be, and the Patriots compete, and this idea looks stupid in 2 months. But either way, another part of this, why I don't think it'll happen in June, like any marquee addition, is because I think they want to get to training camp and get a lot of these young guys reps, like at edge rusher, at cornerback. You bring another veteran in at corner, say like a Steven Nelson that's kind of hanging around there as a free agent. Now all of a sudden, Kaiir Elam dips back. Jamarcus Ingram dips back. And I don't think you can learn as much about them if you bring in a guy that takes a lot of those reps. Not to mention a lot of those vets that have been in the league 7 or 8 years, but don't want those training camp reps to begin with. So I think this is something maybe later in the summer, early in the season, where you'll see Brandon Beane make a move.
Yeah, that's a great take there. You mentioned Kaiir Elam a couple times, and I'm interested to see what he looks like this year. I mean, it was pretty well known from people that were around training camp practices. I mean, you could watch John Butler just crushing this kid. He has obvious confidence issues. He's talked about that. Now, he tried to regain some of that at the end of last year. He had the interception in the playoffs. He made some plays towards the end of the year, and hopefully he can carry that into this offseason. But I'm excited to see what he can maybe do with a different position coach, maybe someone who's building him up on a consistent basis, as opposed to, I mean, look, I'm not in the building on a day-to-day basis. I'm simply saying what I've seen and heard from, people reporting on practices and what they've seen and how he was treated by his position coach. So I'm interested to see if he can step it up this year and maybe come into that first round draft pick mold, which we all hoped we'd see with his size and skill set and all that. Let's give a quick shout out to the hottest sports drink on the planet. That's Prime. And we'll make sure to get someone sent to your house. We'll get your baseball team stocked up for this summer travel baseball schedule, Matt. All right. So big news this past week, and big news based upon the name, not necessarily maybe the impact, but the Bills signed Olympic wrestler Gable Stevenson. He was recently with the WWE, and that didn't work out for him. So he's going to give football a go. I guess he had already worked out for the Bills once, and he came back, worked out again, and they felt like they could sign him. I'll say this first. That's a dude that you don't want to get in a training camp fight with. And I mentioned that on Twitter the other day, and it got some traction. And I'm like, look, we're football players, and like, yes, we're great with our hands. That's what we do, like, especially offensive, defensive line when they get in scraps. Like, we do hand battle drills every single day, but you have a helmet on. You get in a training camp fight, it's more of a wrestling match than anything, and that dude is going to drop some people. I don't think we'll see it because Sean McDermott does a great job of managing practice, but I think back to when Brock Lesnar came in and he got in those big training camp fights when he came into the NFL. But when you look at this Gable Stevenson signing, do you think, I'll just say this, do you think he plays a snap for the Bills in the regular season this year?
No. Definitively no. Like, he's going to have to learn the game from the ground up. And I mean, starting from scratch, unless he's just some, super athletic freak that they can kind of come up with a package for, and kind of shows an ability to play the game. I just think it's something that you sign him to a 3-year deal. You're thinking about long-term developing a guy who is obviously like in a class of rare athletes. And I think that Brandon Beane has never been shy about betting on those kinds of guys. Spencer Brown was that kind of guy, right? Like, he went in the 3rd round, didn't play his last year at COVID, 6'8", 315, like, just the intangibles that he brings. There's certain guys that are just special athletes. And Spencer Brown's not even on the level of a Gable Stevenson. I mean, this guy is Olympic gold medalist, a wrestler. We know Sean McDermott loves those as well. The one holdup here that I had when this was happening. So Ariel Helwani, big Bills fan, MMA journalist.
Love that dude.
Yeah, he's awesome. Reported a couple weeks ago that Steveson, while he was kind of waiting to see what materialized in the NFL, was doing some MMA training, like thinking about like maybe a career in that, which is another level of like, all right, I really don't want to start a fight with him during training camp. That dude
No
all
doubt.
of a sudden gets some hands. But I was kind of on the fence about this when I first heard like the WWE thing didn't work out. Started kind of toying with the idea of MMA. You got to be all in to play these sports at the highest level. Like, if you got one foot where you're dipping your toe in, my first reaction to him getting released by the WWE was like, okay, was that because he was thinking about other things? Like, you can't come to an NFL training camp, as you know, thinking about other things or not being all in. But on the other side of that, Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott, they're not bringing this guy in unless they have full buy-in. So I think that he's coming in, he's going to make the NFL the center of his world, try to become a defensive lineman. And listen, from a size profile standpoint, it's interesting. He's very similar to Ed Oliver. So if you want to come to a spot and learn from a guy, what better than a guy ahead of you that plays at a Pro Bowl level, at times an all-pro level, and especially it does it at your size. I think it's a really interesting signing.
It is interesting. And look, at this point, you can now get 90-man rosters heading into training camp. It used to be 80 when I was with the Bills. And so you get an extra 10 guys for training camp. Only 53 will make that active roster. So you have a good amount of guys on the roster where, you could take a trial on a guy like Gable Stevenson. He brings a work ethic. He brings a presence. Can he speak into, some things of competing on an elite level within this team? I don't know. I don't know his personality that well. He seems to have a great personality. Already reached out to Harrison Phillips, and he's going to work with Harrison some, a former wrestler, used to be with the Bills, now with the Vikings. Fan favorite still in Buffalo, especially for all the work he's done in the community and continues to do in the Buffalo community. And so he's reached out to him. It seems like he'll have a shot to come to training camp to learn, and we're going to find out quickly. He may look like a complete fish out of water out there, but if he's working against the 2 and 3s on the offensive line, the second and third string, he might be able to go out and make a few plays where I could see early on, especially if he gets in late in a preseason game and he's going against some guys that really don't have a shot to make an NFL team on the offensive line position, where he makes a couple plays and then all of a sudden it's who's the running back? Christian Wade, yeah, who came over, the rugby player, and everyone's like, oh, we got to get him on the active roster. Like, he's making these plays against guys that aren't necessarily going to be playing on Sunday. But I could see where there could be a hype train formed around Stevenson, whether it's training camp, whether it's preseason, when he makes a couple plays. But I'm with you. And, that's like when people now I have a career disqualifying neck injury. I could never play football again, but people all the time will say, oh man, you lost 60 pounds or so, you should come back and play tight end. I'm like, tight ends, and I even played tight end in high school, but there's no part of me that is arrogant enough to believe that I could just switch positions and make an impact immediately, much less completely switching a sport to a new sport where I have no familiarity. So we'll see how that shakes out. We've mentioned training camp a few times. I don't have to be at training camp on a day-to-day basis. I hope to come visit this year for training camp, take it all in, check out the roster, get prepped for preseason games, have a little fun, hopefully play a little golf at Oak Hill. But I'm not there on a day-to-day basis like you are. What's one aspect of training camp that you look forward to each year, being in Rochester up at St. John Fisher?
So for me, as part of like my coverage, I'm kind of like an atypical beat reporter, right? Like a lot of like the old school like thought process around how to cover a team is it's about like this one-way stream of information, right? Like the reporter gathers the information, they talk to somebody, they write a story or they do a podcast, they send it out to the world, and that's it. It's done. For me, though, I'm from Buffalo. Like I know how much this team means to the community. I was this diehard Bills fans for 35 years of my life. Like I always thought it would be super cool to have like a back and forth, like experience with a beat reporter. So I try to give that to the fans in so many ways. Our live shows, our insider chat line. And to me, nothing takes center stage more for that piece than during training camp, because I'm out walking the fence. I'm taking in training camp. I'm talking to fans. I'm walking through, the little village that they create there up at St. John Fisher. And that to me is the coolest part. It's like the togetherness of like the community, whether it be with the fan base, whether it be with my peers in the media, playing some golf, hanging out at night, being in the dorms. This year's going to be another level because I've heard through the grapevine. It's a rumor at this point. Josh Reed's bringing the Winnebago. We're gonna be grilling out there. He's gonna have the TV going, maybe even a little campfire. We'll see what happens. But I just love the togetherness, the camaraderie that 2 weeks is like. It feels like you're going off to school or something.
Well, now I know where I'm staying when I get up to Rochester this year for training camp. Unless we bring the family, I won't stick Josh with my wife and 2 kids taking over his RV. But that's awesome that he's going to do it. What's one thing during training camp, or what's one aspect of training camp that you dread heading into it?
I don't think that there's anything that I dread. I will say that by the end of the 2 weeks in the dorm room, that like bed, and I use the term bed loosely, the little cot that they give us.
Right.
I'm taking a beating, dude. My back is absolutely shot by the end of that. I'm trying to do like yoga in the morning when I wake up, anything to kind of get everything kind of straightened out. So that part of it is tough. I could probably just stay in a hotel. Like it's not the end of the world, but like, I don't know, it's part of the process. And I love like waking up, getting a run in, or I bring some Bowflex, like 50-pound interchangeables, and I'll just get like a quick workout in. And then just like you wake up and you walk out on the field. You remember those days, like just being there, like it's so all inclusive. And I like that part of it. And it's almost like I work from home almost all the year. Like now I'll go to the stadium, I'll work out of the media room, but a lot of my show, and not just like my podcast, but like my whole beat coverage, it's moving parts. It's in different places. It's, I've got the kids at home sometimes and I'm doing a million things. Being there at St. John Fisher, it's like, I can concentrate on the job. And I feel like that lead up to the start of the season, like I'm as locked in as ever. And it gets me like on a good starting point for the season.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, the beds were an issue at training camp. So I got some insider information my rookie year heading into training camp that you needed to call Rent-A-Center and get a bed. Well, then when the Pagulas bought the team, I don't know how exactly this came up with Terry and Kim, but I had mentioned that, yeah, a lot of us rent beds from Rent-A-Center, and they're like, well, shouldn't everybody have one? So, of course, the Pagulas, which it's different. The Wilson family, Ralph, this is not an indictment on the Wilson family. Ralph was on his deathbed towards the end of his ownership with the Bills. He's not around on a day-to-day basis. The Pagulas were. And so then they just got everybody a nicer bed when they figured out that, oh, just some people, well, that's an unfair advantage, or we should have everybody in a comfortable bed. So the Pagulas did that for us at the end. I would also rent a mini fridge from Rent-A-Center so that I could just have it there in the dorm. Probably could have bought one. It would have been a lot cheaper after 9 years of renting a mini fridge, but just having like cold Gatorade and Pedialyte in the room. I would rent a huge TV, and again, by the time you rent a TV 9 straight times, it would have been way cheaper just to buy one. But to not have to lug it up there and back, it was
Right.
it was all about the convenience in the dorm room there. All right, I mentioned in the intro that you covered the UFC for 4 years. I'm going to my second UFC fight here this weekend. We're hosting in Louisville, which is a pretty big deal. Like, I was
Yep.
listening to Sports Talk Radio on my way home this morning from a workout, and they were talking about how the list of cities that the UFC is going to. Louisville seems to be fairly small compared to others, so it's awesome that we get to host it this weekend. I went to one in Buffalo back when I was still playing, and that was when Daniel Cormier fought. And Bones Jones, who's from Western New York area, was out in the audience,
Yep.
antagonizing him there with his two brothers. I went backstage afterwards, and I can tell you the trash talking that people saw out in the arena continued into the back, and it was real. It was not for show, because when the cameras were off, it continued. But we had an absolute blast being ringside for it, feeling the energy in the crowd. Got to meet Dana White, got to meet Joe Rogan. Super cool. I need to get prepped for this week, though, and I'm not asking you to break down the entire card. But when you look at, like, if I want to sound smart in front of my buddies, I always say on the broadcast, I pride myself in making other people feel smarter based upon hearing some stuff that I say in the call. How can I feel smarter this weekend around my buddies?
Okay, first and foremost, the headliner, and it's funny because now that I've been 6 years removed from MMA, like I'm not as up on it as I even should be. The Bills dominate my life. It's like anything else, and but I will tell you, Jared Cannonier, who's in the one of the headlining fighters, is one of the most explosive, um, dangerous knockout artists that you can kind of get as a headliner. I mean, he can literally put your lights out with one single punch. And he's fighting a guy that he's been a little bit up and down, Nasruddin Imavov, decent fighter out of France. It's going to be a good fight, but that like threat of the knockout in the main event to me is the only thing you can hope for at an event. Like, and a lot of these names, like big MMA fans might look at this card and be like, oh, there's not a lot of star power, whatever. In my time at the UFC, whenever there was a fight card like this, where you were trying to put it together, piece the puzzle pieces together and understand who's fighting, those were the best fights. Like every time, without fail, you show up and it's unbelievable. You mentioned Jon Jones in the co-main event. Dominic Reyes, who's now the number 15 light heavyweight, trying to make his kind of climb back up. He fought Jon Jones years ago in one of his last light heavyweight fights and gave him a really tough fight. So, I mean, that connection to him, I think, is really cool. There's some younger, lighter weight fighters on the card as well. The kid, Raul Rojas, bantamweight. He's really fun to watch. I think he was on The Ultimate Fighter, the reality TV show. But the big piece of advice, show up early, get there for the first fight. There is a dynamic to watching the fights on the first two or three when the arena's still kind of empty. You hear the thud of every shot, and you hear like the corners screaming out in a way that you don't hear when there's the hustle and bustle of a sold out arena. It's an experience. Every fight's an experience, and you will be shocked. A 4-hour fight card will fly by like this. And a lot of people, like, especially in LA or Vegas even, would show up for like, the last 3 fights. And I'm like, yeah, man, you missed 2.5 hours of just absolute savagery. Like it starts from the beginning. It's an unbelievable experience. You're going to have a blast.
Yeah, I'll do that for sure. Last one for me, and last one on the UFC as well. Dana White recently said that he believes that John Bones Jones is the baddest man to ever compete in combat sports. What's your opinion on that?
He's right. He's right.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, Jon Jones, what he's done to come up to heavyweight and win the his heavyweight fight after dominating the light heavyweight division in a way that we've never seen a singular fighter dominate a division. The only thing holding Jon Jones's legacy back is all the out of the octagon stuff, right? Like the the drug stuff, there was a brief time where he got popped for a drug test, picograms of a substance that he wasn't supposed to be using if he was competing. That's been kind of stricken off of his record, so that's not as much part of it. But he's just been his own worst enemy. He's a party animal, and part of it, like when you're the heavyweight champ, the light heavyweight champ in the UFC, I mean, there's a lifestyle that comes along with it that it's hard. I mean, I think Conor McGregor's fallen victim to it a little bit at times. There's a picture that's come out. He's supposed to be returning in a couple weeks, and he's out at the clubs partying.
I saw that. Partying hard.
Partying hard. Well, he doesn't party any other way.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, that makes sense.
I got a story. It was my first year in the UFC, and I was on the road. UFC Boston. It was before Conor had ever fought for a title. I think it was his second or third fight in the UFC, maybe the fourth. He's fighting Dennis Seaver, first main event. And I was there fight week. I was at Peter Welch's gym, classic boxing gym in Boston. He was training there. I went to watch him spar in there. And then I went to the hotel. He was going to the open workout. So I drove over to the open workouts in his limo bus. Dude, the stories I could tell in 20, 30 years from the stuff that was happening in that limo.
Oh, boy.
It was a wild time, but I just say that because it's not like football or baseball or basketball where even the stars, you're part of a team. Like in MMA, in boxing, you are the attraction, you are the team.
Right.
It's just a different dynamic. And I think what Jon Jones has done over the course of his career in the octagon, considering all of the, out of the octagon stuff that I mentioned, it's just, it almost in a weird way makes it more impressive. It doesn't negate all of that part of it, but he's just been unbeatable by the best. I thought Daniel Cormier was going to win one of those fights, and he never got close.
Yeah, he's a bad dude. His brothers, both badasses too. Arthur, I played against in college at Syracuse, competed against him in the league, defensive tackle. And then obviously Chandler Jones has made a heck of a career for himself. One of the best sack artists in the NFL for a long time. Matt, I appreciate the time as always. Always look forward to catching up with you. Appreciate you coming on the podcast, brother.
Thanks for having me, buddy.